He left the house before the sun came up, like he always did. Same travel mug of coffee, same stretch of highway, same office, waiting at the end of the drive. To everyone else, it was just another commute. To Daniel Reeves, it was the morning he finally realized he could not keep driving toward the same life anymore. If you're new to this channel, leave a like and subscribe. It helps this archive grow, and it makes sure you don't miss what really happened on the commute he never came back from.
Daniel Reeves left his house at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning in February and drove into a life he could no longer recognize. The highway stretched ahead like every other morning, gray and familiar. But somewhere between the exit ramp and the office parking lot, he simply stopped being the man who arrived. No one noticed at first. If you're enjoying this channel, leave a like and subscribe. It truly helps this archive grow. And at the end of this journey, I will reveal everything these files have been trying to tell us. I came across Daniel's story the way I come across most of these files, not through headlines or missing person reports, but through the small, overlooked fractures that appear in the records of ordinary American lives. A paycheck deposited but never touched. A voicemail left by a supervisor that was never returned. A car found 3 days later in a grocery store parking lot. Keys still in the ignition, engine cold, windows fogged from the inside. Daniel Reeves was 41 years old, married for 16 years. Father to 2 daughters he loved in that quiet, unexpressive way some men love their children. Deeply, but without the language to say so. He worked in logistics coordination for a mid-sized shipping company in a low-rise office building off Route 83. The kind of job that required vigilance, but offered no glory. The kind of work that fills a life without ever defining it. He was not unhappy, his wife would later say. He was not depressed. He was just tired. Always tired. But tired is not a diagnosis. Tired does not show up on medical charts or employment reviews. Tired is what we call it when a man has been holding his breath for years and has forgotten he's even doing it. Daniel had been holding his breath since he was 27, since the wedding, since the first mortgage, since the moment he realized that the life he had built was not the life he had imagined, but it was the only life he had. And so he learned to live it the way you learn to live with a low-grade headache that never quite goes away. You stop mentioning it. You stop noticing it. You just carry it. On that Tuesday morning, Daniel woke at 6:30, as he always did. The alarm on his phone played a generic chime that he had never bothered to change. His wife, Laura, was already awake, moving quietly through the kitchen, packing lunches for the girls. Her hair still damp from the shower. She did not look at him when he came downstairs, not because she was angry, but because after 16 years, some mornings, you just don't look. You move in parallel, efficient and silent, like workers on an assembly line. He poured coffee into the same blue mug he used every day, added cream from the carton Laura always bought, even though he had told her 100 times he preferred it black, and drank it anyway because it didn't matter enough to argue about. The girls were still asleep. He did not wake them. He had stopped waking them years ago, after realizing that his presence in their morning routine had become optional, a gesture neither required nor particularly wanted. He was the man who left early and came home late, the man who paid for things, the man whose absence was more reliable than his presence. He kissed Laura on the cheek, a reflex, a formality. She turned her face slightly so that his lips landed near her ear, and she murmured something about picking up milk on the way home. He said he would. He wouldn't. Not because he meant to forget, but because by the time he left the office each night, his mind was already so far away from the list of small tasks that defined his domestic life, that remembering anything felt like trying to catch smoke with your hands. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, the same bowl they had received as a wedding gift, ceramic and hand-painted with some kind of floral pattern that had faded over the years, until it was just a vague suggestion of color. He walked to his car, a silver sedan with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident he couldn't quite remember, and climbed inside. The interior smelled like old coffee, and the faint synthetic vanilla of the air freshener Laura had hung from the rearview mirror 2 months ago. He adjusted the seat even though it was already in the correct position, turned the key, and felt the engine shudder to life. The dashboard glowed in the dim morning light, a constellation of icons and numbers that told him nothing he didn't already know. He had half a tank of gas. The temperature outside was 34 degrees. The date was February 9th. He put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and turned onto the street that led to the main road that led to the highway that led to his life. The route was 40 minutes on a good day, 50 if there was traffic near the interchange. Daniel had driven it so many times that his body seemed to do it without his mind's participation. His hands knew when to turn, his foot knew when to brake, his eyes tracked the road with the dull precision of a security camera. He listened to the radio, the same news station he always listened to. The Samarupuaf headlines repeating every 20 minutes like a mantra. A storm system moving through the Midwest. A budget debate in the state legislature. A local school receiving an award for something or other. The voices were smooth and professional, designed to be heard but not really listened to, designed to fill the silence without demanding attention. Daniel did not care about the storm system. He did not care about the budget debate. He did not care about the school. But he listened anyway, because the alternative was silence. And silence in a car alone at 7:30 in the morning is the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, your own existence in a way that feels almost unbearable. He passed the same landmarks he passed every morning, the gas station with the hand-painted sign that had been advertising a car wash special for 3 years. The church with the white steeple and the message board that rotated inspirational quotes every week, currently reading, "Faith is the bridge between where you are and where God wants you to be." The elementary school with the crossing guard who waved at every car, even though no children were ever crossing at this hour. The strip mall with the donut shop and the dry cleaner and the insurance office with the faded poster of a family smiling under an umbrella. Daniel had never been inside any of these places. They were simply part of the landscape, part of the routine, part of the proof that his life was moving forward, even when it felt like it was standing still. He merged onto the highway, the sedan sliding into the flow of morning traffic like a fish rejoining a school. Around him, other cars moved with the same blank determination, each one carrying a person whose face he could not see, whose name he would never know, whose life was as private and unremarkable and desperately held together as his own. He wondered sometimes, in those brief moments when his mind wandered, if any of them felt the way he did. If any of them woke up each morning with the vague sense that they were living someone else's life, that somewhere along the way, they had made a wrong turn and ended up in a place that looked right from the outside but felt wrong from the inside. But he never wondered long enough to come to any conclusion. The thoughts came and went like the mile markers on the side of the road, regular and meaningless. At 7:43, Daniel passed the exit for the outlet mall, the point at which his commute was exactly halfway complete. He glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard and felt the familiar small relief of being on schedule. Being on time was one of the few things he still controlled, one of the few things he could still do correctly. He had not been late to work in 4 years, not once. It was a point of pride, though he had never told anyone about it, because who takes pride in showing up? Showing up is the minimum. Showing up is what you do when you have no other choice. But on this particular Tuesday at 7:46, something shifted. Daniel would not have been able to describe it if anyone had asked, and no one did ask, because by the time anyone thought to ask, it was already too late. It was not a thought, not exactly. It was more like a sudden awareness, the way you might suddenly become aware of a sound that has been present the entire time, but only now breaks through into your consciousness. He became aware of his hands on the steering wheel, pale and dry, the knuckles slightly red from the cold. He became aware of the pressure of the seat against his back, the hum of the engine, the faint squeak of the windshield wipers moving across glass that wasn't quite wet enough to need wiping. He became aware of himself sitting in this car, on this highway, heading toward a building where he would sit in a chair and look at a computer screen, and answer emails and attend meetings and eat lunch alone in his car and then drive home again. And tomorrow he would do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until one day he would retire or die, whichever came first, and none of it would have meant anything at all. The thought was not new. He had thought it before, in various forms, late at night when he couldn't sleep, or early in the morning when the alarm went off, and he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, bargaining with himself for 5 more minutes. But this time, the thought did not pass. It settled over him like a weight, like a hand pressing down on his chest, and suddenly he could not breathe. His vision narrowed. The cars around him seemed to blur. He felt his foot ease off the gas pedal, felt the car begin to slow, felt the distance growing between himself and the vehicle ahead. Someone honked. He did not react. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, loud and arrhythmic, and he thought, with a strange clarity, that he was going to die right here, right now, in the middle lane of a highway at 7:48 on a Tuesday morning, and no one would even know why. But he did not die. His heart kept beating. His lungs kept pulling in air. The car kept moving, slower now, drifting toward the right lane, toward the shoulder, toward the space between the road and the rest of his life. And Daniel, without deciding to, without planning to, without even fully realizing what he was doing, let it drift. He let the car carry him toward the edge, and when the tires hit the gravel of the shoulder, he did not correct. He simply stopped. The car sat on the shoulder of the highway for 11 minutes before anyone noticed, and even then, noticed is perhaps too strong a word. A state trooper passed by, slowed slightly, saw a man sitting upright behind the wheel with his hands in his lap, assumed he was on a phone call or checking directions, and continued on. This is how invisible a breakdown can be when it happens in broad daylight, when the person braking remains outwardly still, when the collapse occurs entirely within the borders of a single human body. Daniel stared through the windshield at the river of traffic moving past him, each car a sealed capsule of purpose and direction, and he felt as though he were watching life itself flow by while he sat suspended in some other state, some gray zone between participation and absence. The engine was still running, the heat was still on. The radio was still playing, though he could no longer distinguish the words from the static, could no longer separate the voice of the newscaster from the white noise of his own thoughts. His hands were still on the steering wheel, fingers curved around the leather grip with the gentle tension of someone pretending to be in control. But something fundamental had shifted. He had driven off the map of his own life, and he did not know how to find his way back, or if he even wanted to. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced down and saw Laura's name on the screen, a text message asking if he had remembered to put the trash out before he left. He had not remembered. The trash was still sitting in the garage, 2 bags full of the accumulated debris of their family life, and now it would sit there until next week, and Laura would be quietly irritated in that way she had perfected over the years. The kind of irritation that never erupted into an argument but simply settled into the atmosphere of their home like dust. He did not pick up the phone. He watched it buzz once, twice, 3 times, and then go still. The screen darkened. The message remained unread. It seemed important somehow not to answer, as though answering would require him to step back into the person he had been 20 minutes ago, and he was not sure he could remember how to do that. Another car slowed as it passed, a woman in an SUV with a child strapped into a car seat in the back. The woman glanced at him through her window, her expression briefly concerned, but then the child said something and her attention shifted and she accelerated away, back into the current of the world, and Daniel was alone again. He understood in that moment that he could sit here for hours, and no one would truly intervene, because a man sitting in a car on the side of a highway is not a crisis, not a spectacle, not anything that demands action. He was simply part of the landscape now, as unremarkable as the guardrail or the mile markers, or the litter trapped against the fence line. He thought about his daughters, Olivia, who was 13, and had recently stopped hugging him goodbye in the mornings, who spent her evenings locked in her room with her headphones on, moving through the house like a ghost who had outgrown her haunting. And Emma, who was 9 and still sometimes crawled into his lap when he sat on the couch, still sometimes asked him to read to her even though she could read perfectly well herself, still sometimes looked at him with a kind of uncomplicated affection that made him feel both grateful and fraudulent, because he knew she was seeing a father he was not sure he had ever really been. He loved them, he was certain of that. But love, he had learned, was not the same as presence. Love was something you could feel while being entirely absent, and he had been absent for so long that he was not sure they would notice if he never came home. The thought should have horrified him. Instead, it arrived with a strange kind of relief, the way a diagnosis can be a relief even when the diagnosis is bad, because at least then you know what you are dealing with. At least then the shapeless dread has a name. He had been driving toward this moment for years without realizing it. Each morning commute a small rehearsal, each return home a temporary reprieve. And now, finally, he had arrived. Not at work, not at home, but at the place where those 2 points ceased to matter, where the whole architecture of his life revealed itself to be optional, a set of agreements he had made without ever asking if he wanted to make them. At 7:59, Daniel put the car in gear and pulled back onto the highway. Not toward work, not toward home, just forward. He drove with no destination, no plan, following the highway as it curved north and then east, taking exits at random, turning onto roads he had never traveled, moving through towns whose names he did not know. He passed through a place where all the buildings were made of red brick, and the main street was lined with bare trees. He passed through another place where the houses sat far back from the road behind lawns brown with winter. He passed a factory with smokestacks that released white steam into the colorless sky, and a church with a cross made of steel that caught the weak morning light, and a farm where black cows stood motionless in a frozen field like monuments to patience. His phone rang 4 times over the next 2 hours, twice from Laura, once from a number he did not recognize, once from his office. He let them all go to voicemail. He did not listen to the messages. He could imagine what they said. "Where are you? Are you okay? We need you to call us back." As though calling back were a simple thing, as though he could simply pick up the phone and say, "I'm fine. I'll be there soon." As though the distance between where he was and where he was supposed to be could be measured in miles rather than in the complete dissolution of his ability to pretend. By 10:30, he was nearly 60 miles from his office, driving through a landscape of low hills and naked trees, and the occasional gas station or convenience store set back from the road like an offering to travelers who had lost their way. His fuel gauge was approaching a quarter tank. His bladder was full. His stomach was empty. These physical facts registered dimly, like news from a distant country, important perhaps, but not urgent, not yet. He kept driving. He thought about his father, who had worked for 38 years at a printing company that no longer existed, who had come home every evening smelling of ink and machinery, who had sat in his recliner after dinner and fallen asleep with the television on, who had died of a heart attack at 62 in the parking lot of a grocery store, slumped over the steering wheel of his own car, bags of food in the trunk that would spoil before anyone thought to retrieve them. Daniel had been 24 when it happened. He remembered standing at the funeral, looking at the casket, thinking how strange it was that his father's entire life could be summarized in a 3-paragraph obituary that mentioned his job, his marriage, his children, and nothing else, as though those were the only things that mattered, as though the interior landscape of the man had been irrelevant. And now Daniel was 41, and he understood with a clarity that felt like nausea that he was living the same life, following the same script, and if he died tomorrow his obituary would read almost identically except for the names and dates, and his daughters would stand at his funeral and think the same thoughts he had thought, and the cycle would continue, generation after generation, each one inheriting the same quiet desperation and mistaking it for responsibility. At 11:15, Daniel pulled into the parking lot of a diner he had never seen before. A low building with aluminum siding and a gravel lot, and a neon sign that said "Eat" in red letters, half of which were burned out so that it read, EA. There were 3 other cars in the lot, trucks mostly, covered in road salt and mud. He parked at the far end, away from the entrance, and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was profound. Without the hum of the road, without the radio, without the rhythm of motion, he was left alone with himself, and himself was not good company. He did not go inside. He sat in the car and watched a man in a denim jacket walk out of the diner carrying a to-go cup. Watched him climb into one of the trucks and drive away, exhaust rising in a white plume against the gray sky. He watched a woman push through the door, light a cigarette, smoke it in quick, agitated drags, and then go back inside. He watched the minutes pass on the dashboard clock, each one identical to the last, and he felt time stretching around him like taffy, elastic and strange, no longer moving him toward anything, just moving. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail notification. He picked it up, unlocked the screen, and saw that he had 6 missed calls and 4 text messages. He opened the messages. The first was from Laura. "Did you leave?" The second, "Where are you?" The third, "Daniel, please answer." The fourth was from his supervisor at work. "Need to know your ETA. We have the logistics meeting at noon." He read them without feeling, the way you might read words in a language you once knew but have forgotten. They seemed to be addressed to someone else, someone who still existed in the world these messages came from. He set the phone down and looked out at the diner, at the EA sign, at the highway beyond, and he thought that he could just keep driving, that he could point the car west or south or north and simply go, leave everything behind, start over in some town where no one knew his name, get a job washing dishes or stocking shelves, live in a room above a bar, become a different person, or maybe just become no one at all. And would that be so terrible? Would that be worse than this? But even as he thought it, he knew he would not do it. Not because he was brave enough to stay, but because he was not brave enough to leave. Because disappearing required a kind of conviction he did not possess, a willingness to burn every bridge and salt the earth behind you. And Daniel was not a man who burned bridges. He was a man who maintained them, who repaired them, who crossed them every day even when they led nowhere he wanted to go. So he sat in the parking lot of a diner whose name he did not know, in a town whose name he had not noticed, and he tried to imagine what came next, and he could not imagine anything at all. At 1:47 in the afternoon, Daniel bought a cup of coffee from the diner, black this time, the way he had always preferred it before he stopped mentioning his preferences. The waitress was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and the kind of face that suggested she had heard every story there was to hear, and had stopped being surprised by any of them. She poured the coffee without asking questions, without commenting on the fact that he had been sitting in the parking lot for over 2 hours, without remarking on the way his hand trembled slightly when he handed her $3 bills and told her to keep the change. She simply nodded, said "Thank you, honey," and went back to wiping down the counter. It was the most human interaction Daniel had experienced in months, perhaps years, and it required nothing of him except existing for 30 seconds in proximity to another person. He almost cried. He did not cry. He took the coffee and walked back to his car. He drove east this time, or what he thought was east, following signs for towns he had heard of but never visited. Millerton, Ashford, Ridgeview. Names that sounded like they should mean something, that probably did mean something to the people who lived there. But to Daniel, they were just sounds, syllables on green signs that appeared and disappeared as he passed. The coffee sat in the cup holder, untouched and cooling, steam no longer rising from the small opening in the plastic lid. He had bought it not because he wanted it, but because buying it gave him a reason to exist for a moment, a transaction that proved he was still part of the world, even if he no longer felt part of it. His phone had stopped ringing. The silence was worse than the ringing had been. It meant that people had moved from concern to anger, or from anger to resignation, or from resignation to whatever came after resignation. He imagined Laura at home, calling his office, calling hospitals, calling the police perhaps, her voice taking on that tight, controlled quality it got when she was trying not to let the girls see that something was wrong. He imagined his supervisor deleting his name from the meeting agenda, reassigning his projects, already mentally composing the email that would go to human resources about unexcused absences and job abandonment. He imagined the world moving on without him with barely a ripple, the way water closes over a stone. By 3 o'clock, he was driving through farmland, fields of stubble and frozen dirt stretching toward a horizon that was the same pale gray as the sky, so that earth and air seemed to merge into a single colorless void. The road was straight and empty. He had not seen another car in 20 minutes. He could drive forever here, he thought. He could drive until the gas ran out, and then walk until his legs gave out, and then lie down in one of these fields and let the cold take him. And by the time anyone found him, he would be so far from the person he used to be that identification would be a formality, a name attached to a body that no longer corresponded to any living memory of who Daniel Reeves had been. But he did not want to die. That was the strange part, the part he could not reconcile. He did not want to die, but he also did not want to live the life he had been living. He wanted to be someone else, somewhere else, but he did not know how to become someone else when you are 41 years old, and every choice you have made has led you to exactly this point. This car, this road, this suffocating certainty that there is no way forward and no way back. He was trapped in the momentum of his own biography, a passenger in a vehicle he had been driving for so long, he had forgotten he was the one steering. He thought about the meeting he was missing, the one his supervisor had mentioned. Logistics coordination for a shipment of industrial parts from a warehouse in Kentucky to a distribution center in Pennsylvania. He knew the details without having to check his notes. 6 pallets of electrical components. Delivery window between Thursday and Saturday. Client relationship worth approximately $40,000 annually. He had coordinated hundreds of shipments like this, perhaps thousands, each one a small puzzle of timing and routing and cost optimization, each one forgotten the moment it was completed. And today, the meeting would happen without him. Someone else would pull up the spreadsheets. Someone else would call the trucking company. The shipment would arrive on time or it would not, and either way, the world would continue turning. And in 6 months, no one would remember that Daniel Reeves had once been the person who made sure these things happened. At 3:30, he stopped at a gas station in a town called Brennan, a place so small it seemed to consist entirely of the gas station itself, a grain elevator, and a handful of houses set back from the road behind leafless trees. He filled the tank and went inside to pay, and the man behind the counter looked at him with the bland expression of someone who sees strangers all day and has learned not to see them at all. Daniel handed him 2 20s and waited for the change, and in that moment he understood that he could tell this man everything, could say, "I have left my life and I do not know how to go back," and the man would still hand him his change and say, "Have a nice day," because that is what people do. They perform their roles, they say the things they are supposed to say, and meaning is optional. He bought a bottle of water and a package of peanut butter crackers, not because he was hungry, but because he felt he should eat, because his body required fuel even if his spirit had no appetite for anything. He ate in the parking lot, the crackers dry and tasteless, the water cold and faintly metallic. Across the street, a dog was tied to a fence post, barking at nothing, at the wind or at its own shadow, or at the existential absurdity of being a dog tied to a fence post in Brennan on a Tuesday in February. Daniel watched the dog and felt a kinship with it, both of them tethered to something they did not choose, both of them calling out into the void with no expectation of answer. He drove until the sun began to set, which in February meant 4:30, the light draining from the sky like water from a basin, leaving behind a residue of orange and purple that lasted only minutes before fading to black. He turned on his headlights. The road ahead became a tunnel of illumination surrounded by darkness, and he felt as though he were descending into something, or ascending out of something, or simply moving through something that had no name. He passed through towns that were lit and towns that were dark, past houses where families were sitting down to dinner, past gas stations and closed storefronts and churches with empty parking lots, past all the infrastructure of American life continuing its routines without him. At 5:15, his phone rang again, and this time he answered it. Not because he had decided to, but because his hand moved before his mind could intervene. Lifting the phone to his ear, thumb pressing the green icon, and then Laura's voice was in the car with him, tight and strained, and on the edge of something that might have been tears or might have been rage. "Where are you?" she said. "Daniel, where are you? Are you hurt? Did something happen? I've been calling all day. The office called me. They said you never came in. I called the hospitals. I called the police, but they said you have to be missing for 24 hours before they can do anything. Daniel, talk to me. Please. Just tell me where you are and I'll come get you. Or tell me you're okay and you'll come home. Just tell me something." And Daniel opened his mouth to speak and found that he had no words, or that he had too many words, or that the words he had were in a language he no longer knew how to use. He wanted to tell her that he was not hurt, not in the way she meant. He wanted to tell her that he was sorry, though he was not sure what he was apologizing for. He wanted to tell her that he loved her, which was true, and that he could not come home, which was also true, and that both of these things could exist simultaneously without contradiction. But instead he said, "I'm okay. I just needed to drive." And she said, "Drive where?" And he said, "I don't know." And she said, "What do you mean you don't know?" And he said, "I mean, I don't know, Laura. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know why I'm going there. I don't know how to explain this." And she was quiet for a long time, and then she said very softly, "Are you leaving me?" The question hung in the air between them, transmitted through cellular towers and satellites and fiber optic cables, traveling at the speed of light across the miles that separated them, and Daniel considered it seriously, as though it were a genuine question and not an accusation. Was he leaving her? He was certainly not with her. He was somewhere else, somewhere she was not, and he had no immediate plans to return. But leaving implied intentionality, implied a decision made and acted upon, and what he was doing felt less like leaving and more like dissolving, less like departure and more like evaporation. So he said, "No, I'm not leaving you." And she said, "Then what are you doing?" And he said, "I don't know." And she said, "The girls are asking about you. Emma wants to know if you're going to be home for dinner. What do I tell her?" And Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed for so long he had forgotten it was there. And he said, "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'll be home soon." And Laura said, "When?" And Daniel said, "Soon." And Laura said, "That's not an answer." And Daniel said, "I know." And then he hung up. He pulled over immediately, onto the shoulder of a county road lined with frozen cornfields, and he put his head on the steering wheel, and he wept. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone who is sad, but the ugly, convulsive sobs of someone who has been holding everything in for so long that when it finally comes out, it comes out all at once, like a dam breaking, like a building collapsing, like something fundamental giving way. He cried for his daughters who deserved a father who was present. He cried for his wife who deserved a husband who could be found. He cried for himself, for the years he had spent pretending, for the life he had built that felt like a prison, for the person he had been before he learned to be this person. He cried until there was nothing left to cry, until he was empty, until his body was just a shell doing the mechanical work of breathing. When he finally lifted his head, the world outside was completely dark. His headlights illuminated a stretch of road and a field and nothing else. He was alone in a way he had never been alone before. Alone not just physically, but existentially, cut loose from every mooring that had once held him in place. And in that aloneness, there was a kind of terrible freedom. No one knew where he was. No one was watching. He could do anything. He could go anywhere. The entire map of his future had been erased, and he was standing at the edge of something vast and unmarked and terrifying. He started the engine. He did not know where he was going, but he drove. Daniel spent that night in his car in the parking lot of a rest area off Route 47, somewhere between the life he had left and the life he did not have. The engine ran for the first hour to keep the heat on, and then he turned it off to save gas, and the cold crept in slowly, methodically, until he was shivering under his coat, his breath visible in the dome light when he exhaled. Around him, semis idled in their designated spaces, drivers sleeping in their cabs, living their lives on the road in a way that seemed honest somehow, transient by design rather than by accident. Daniel envied them. At least they knew what they were. He did not sleep. He sat in the reclined driver's seat and watched the occasional car pull in, park, disgorge passengers who shuffled into the rest area building and returned minutes later, and then drive away into the night. He wondered about each of them, where they were coming from, where they were going, whether any of them felt the way he felt, like an astronaut whose tether had been cut, floating in the vast silence of space with no way back to the ship. Probably some of them did, probably more than he imagined, but people are very good at hiding their drifting, very good at pretending the tether is still attached. At some point past midnight, a police cruiser rolled through the parking lot, moving slowly between the rows of vehicles, spotlight sweeping across license plates and windows. Daniel watched it approach, watched the light pass over his car, linger for a moment on his face, and then move on. The cruiser completed its circuit and left. He had not been questioned. He had not been asked to move. He was not doing anything illegal. A man sitting in a car in a rest area at night is unusual perhaps, but not criminal, not actionable. The police have more pressing concerns than people who are not bothering anyone, who are simply taking up space in the world and trying to figure out what to do with themselves. When morning came, it came without drama. The sky shifting from black to gray so gradually that there was no single moment you could point to and say, "Now it is day." Daniel's body ached from the cramped position, his neck stiff, his lower back sending sharp complaints up his spine when he tried to sit up. He felt unwashed and hollow and strangely calm, the way you might feel after a fever breaks, weak but clear-headed. He started the car and drove to the rest area building, used the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. The man looking back was recognizable but altered. Eyes red-rimmed, skin pale, stubble beginning to show along his jaw. He looked like someone recovering from an illness. He looked like someone who had lost something important. He looked, he thought, like himself for the first time in years. He bought coffee from a vending machine, the kind that comes in a paper cup and tastes like hot brown water flavored with chemicals, and he drank it in the car while trying to decide what to do next. His phone was at 8% battery. He had not charged it. He had 17 missed calls now and 12 text messages, and 2 voicemails he had not listened to. He could listen to them. He could call Laura back. He could tell her where he was, tell her he was coming home. Tell her he had just needed a night to clear his head and everything was fine now. He could step back into his life as though this had been a brief intermission, a momentary glitch in the program. People would be confused for a few days, perhaps annoyed, perhaps concerned. But then the routines would reassert themselves, and this would become a story they told at dinners. Remember that time Daniel just drove off for a day? What was that about? And eventually even the story would fade and it would be as though it had never happened. But he did not call. He plugged the phone into the car charger and set it face down in the passenger seat and drove back onto the highway, heading south now, toward no destination he could name. He drove through the morning and into the afternoon, through landscapes that repeated themselves with minor variations, forests and fields and towns that looked like every other town, each one with its main street and its churches and its gas stations, and its people going about their lives with the determined focus of actors who have rehearsed their roles so many times, they no longer need to think about them. He stopped for gas. He stopped for food, a sandwich from a convenience store that he ate while driving, tasting nothing. He stopped at a public library in a town called Fairhope and sat in the parking lot with the engine off, watching people carry books in and out. And he thought about going inside, about sitting at one of those tables and reading something, anything, just to be in a room with other people who were doing something purposeful. But he did not go in. He was afraid that if he stopped moving, he would have to confront the question of what he was doing, and he was not ready to answer that question. Motion was easier than stillness. Motion gave the illusion of purpose. At 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 26 hours after he had first pulled onto the shoulder of the highway, Daniel drove past a sign that said, "Welcome to Greystone, population 4,200, and something in him recognized the town, even though he had never been there before. It was the kind of place that existed in every state, the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to disappear without actually disappearing, when they wanted to be somewhere that was not anywhere in particular. He took the exit. He drove down the main street past the hardware store and the pharmacy and the diner and the bank, and he thought, I could stop here. I could rent a room. I could get a job. I could become someone else. Not permanently, perhaps. Not forever. But long enough to remember who I used to be before I became the person I have been. He parked in front of a real estate office with a help wanted sign in the window. He did not go inside. He sat and looked at the sign and thought about the logistics of starting over, the practical considerations. He would need identification. He would need references. He would need to explain the gap in his employment, the sudden departure, the appearance in a new town with no history and no connections. Or he could lie. He could say he had been laid off, that he was relocating for family reasons, that he had always wanted to live in a small town. People believe what you tell them if you tell it with enough conviction. He had spent his entire adult life telling convincing stories about who he was. He could do it again. He could do it better this time. But even as he thought it, he knew it was fantasy. He knew he would not rent a room in Greystone. He knew he would not apply for the job. He knew he was not the kind of man who reinvented himself, who burned his old life to the ground and rose from the ashes as someone new. He was the kind of man who maintained, who endured, who bent but did not break. He was the kind of man who would eventually go home because going home was what men like him did. Not because they wanted to, but because they did not know how to want anything else. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Laura. He answered. Her voice was different this time, not tight with worry, but flat with exhaustion. She said his name. He said hers. She said, "Are you coming home?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "When?" And he said, "Today. Tonight. I don't know exactly when, but soon." And she said, "Okay." And then, after a pause, Daniel, I don't know what's happening with you. I don't know how to help you. I don't even know if you want help. But the girls need you. I need you. And if you can't do this anymore, if you can't be here, then you need to tell me. You need to tell me so I can figure out what to do. But you can't just leave without saying anything. You can't just disappear. That's not fair. That's not fair to any of us. And Daniel said, I know. And she said, do you? And he said, I'm sorry. And she said, that's not enough. And he said, I know that too. And she said, then what? And he said, I don't know, Laura. I don't have an answer. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know how to fix it. I just know that I woke up yesterday and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't drive to work. I couldn't sit in that office. I couldn't come home and pretend everything was fine. And I don't know if that makes me weak or selfish or broken or what, but it's the truth. And she was quiet. And then she said, maybe you should talk to someone. And he said, maybe. And she said, I can't fix this for you, Daniel. You have to fix it. And he said, I know. And she said, the girls made you a card. Emma made you a card. It says, come home, Daddy. She's been sleeping with it under her pillow. And when she said that, Daniel felt his eyes burn and his throat close, and he had to look away from the phone, out the window at the street, at the ordinary town doing its ordinary things. And he said, tell her I'm coming. Tell her I'll be there tonight. He hung up and sat in the car and cried again, but differently this time. Not the wrenching sobs of the night before, but something quieter. Something that felt less like breaking and more like grieving. He was grieving the person he had thought he would become, the life he had thought he would live, the version of himself that had never quite materialized. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was allowed. Maybe you were permitted to mourn the life you did not have even while living the life you did. At 4:30, as the winter sun began its early descent, Daniel Reeves put the car in gear and drove out of Greystone, back toward the highway, back toward home. The drive took 3 hours. He listened to nothing. He thought about everything and nothing. He thought about his daughters and his wife and his job and his father and all the other men who had driven these roads, who had felt these things, who had made these choices or failed to make them. He thought about the rest area and the diner and the parking lot where he had sat for 2 hours watching people come and go. He thought about the police cruiser that had checked on him and moved on, deciding he was not worth intervening in. He thought about the question Laura had asked, "Are you leaving me?" He thought about the question beneath that question, "Who are you?" When he pulled into his driveway at 7:43, the house was lit from within, warm light spilling from the windows onto the dark lawn. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, looking at the house, at the life inside it, and he felt a complicated mixture of dread and relief, and something that might have been love, or might have been obligation, or might have been both, because maybe they were the same thing after all. Maybe love was just obligation transformed by familiarity and time into something you could mistake for choice. He got out of the car. He walked to the door. Before he could reach for the handle, it opened, and Emma was there, holding her card, her face breaking into a smile, and she said, "Daddy," and he knelt down and held her. And over her shoulder he could see Laura standing in the hallway, arms crossed, face unreadable, and Olivia at the top of the stairs watching. He did not know what happened next. He did not know if this was the end of something or the beginning of something, or just a pause in the middle of something that would continue unchanged. He did not know if he would wake up tomorrow and feel the same weight, the same suffocating sense of being trapped in a life that fit him like a suit 3 sizes too small. He did not know if he would ever find the words to explain what had happened to him out there on the highway, or if there were words for it at all. But he knew he was home, and for tonight that would have to be enough. This is the story of Daniel Reeves, who left for work one Tuesday morning and spent 36 hours driving through the unmarked territories of his own collapse before returning to the life he did not know how to leave. It is not a story about disappearance, but about the moment just before disappearance, when a man stands on the edge and looks into the void and then steps back, not because he has found an answer, but because he has run out of road. It is a story about the invisible weight that ordinary people carry, about the slow erosion of identity that happens when you spend so many years being what you are supposed to be that you forget who you wanted to be. It is a story that happens every day in America, to people whose names you will never know, whose crises are too quiet to make the news, whose suffering is mistaken for tiredness. If you are listening to this, if you have made it this far, then maybe you understand. Maybe you have felt this too. And if you have, then know that you are not alone in that feeling, even though the feeling itself is loneliness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And if these files have meant something to you, if they have helped you see the world or yourself a little differently, then please subscribe. Not for me, but for the archive, for the record of these lives that almost disappeared, for the reminder that we are all, in our own ways, commuters who are trying to make it home.